Wow, this is one of the most graphic, not one of, it is the most graphic thing I've ever seen on a set. James will kind of rein you in immediately and say, all right, knock it off. And once it starts, I start sweating. Hi, I'm Steve Agee. I play John Economos on Peacemaker, and this is Set Stories with Collider. Season 2, the very first episode, there's an orgy scene, and my character, while it's going on, is kind of surveilling the house for Argus. I'm kind of spying on John Cena, and they tell me to go move in and get a closer look. And so I run around the side of the house and I look in the window, and there's like 30 people having sex. And the day we shot that, you get the script and it's not that graphic. It says, John Cena comes home, he's depressed, he calls a bunch of people, there's an orgy. It's not very descriptive. So I showed up and walked up to the window to shoot that scene, and there were there were 30 people, and they had robes on, and they said, all right, we're ready to shoot. The cameras are rolling. Everybody take your robes off and get into position. And I was like, oh my God. And then they start shooting it, and I'm just standing there like, wow, this is one of the most graphic things I've ever, definitely not one of, it is the most graphic thing I've ever seen on a set. Yeah, James definitely knows what he wants. He's one of the most prepared directors I've ever worked with. Most of what you see is what was written. It's improving is very rare, but it does make it on Peacemaker. Season 1, there's a very kind of viral video of John Cena naming all these people that I should have framed, instead of framing his father. In the original script, it was just, you could have framed Ariana Grande or Drake, and that was it. And we went back actually to reshoot the scene later on in the season, and James is always off camera, and he's got a microphone, and between James and John Cena, they kind of improvised all the, it's like a 3 or 4 minute scene of them just saying names.
Payne Stewart or Doug the Pug, Khloe Kardashian, the Red Tiger.
A lot of those names are James throwing stuff out for John to say, but a lot of them are also John making stuff up. So they have a couple different things. They have an actual doll that's like this tall. It's just about as tall as a real eagle, and they'll put it down on the set. You're never looking at it though. They'll put it down when you're getting ready to shoot, and they'll say, all right, this is where Eagly is, just so you know where to look. And then they take him away. So it's just kind of trying to remember, where the eagle is. He's never there. Sometimes they have another one, same size, but it's completely gray. And I think they use that just so that the visual effects crew can see where the actual light is coming from, because it reflects the light better than a stuffed animal. And then sometimes there's just a stick that's as tall as Eagly, and they say, look at this. But yeah, it's a lot of imagining.
Eagly, look what they did.
That was the weirdest scene I've ever shot with Eagly, because usually he's kind of in one place when I have to address him or talk to him. This is a whole scene where I'm tied up to a chair, and he's over at the refrigerator, and then walks in front of me, and then walks out of the room, and then So they had to do a lot of, okay, here's where he's walking. They would put the doll here, then here, then here. And so you kind of have to just remember all that. Yeah, it's bizarre. Definitely Jen Holland, who plays Harcourt. Freddie, who plays Vigilante. They're really good dancers. Sol Rodriguez. Everyone did a really good job. The people that struggled the most, kind of the older guys, Robert Patrick and Michael Rooker, and oddly Tim Meadows. Tim really had a hard time. And I'm not goofing on him or anything. He's the first to admit that it was really, really difficult for him to do the dance. I mean, it was a lot, and it was 2 days of shooting, so it was exhausting. But yeah, I'd say Robert and Rooker and Tim and myself as well. I'm not a great dancer, so I found it a little difficult. We also have the luxury of, we shoot it for 2 days. and there's a lot of coverage, and it's done in sections. You know, the first people you see John Cena first, and then it cuts to a section with, you know, the 11th Street Kids, me and Adebayo and Vigilante and Harcourt, and then it cuts to the newer people like Frank Grillo and Sol Rodriguez, and so you have the luxury of memorizing it in chunks, which is great because I couldn't do it all in one take. That would be impossible for me. There's a scene in like episode 3 or 4 where I'm in Adebayo's she's living in a hotel, like really has no money, and I'm in there and I'm talking to her about all this like technical stuff like marital radar and aliens and rifts and stuff, and I could not remember those lines because they're technical. It's a lot of stuff that isn't even real, and so that's always harder to memorize. And like I thought I was losing my mind because I'm usually pretty good at memorizing, and that was like a really frustrating day. And Danielle's like a Juilliard trained, you know, actor, always has her lines, and I'm just sitting there, and once it starts I start sweating because I'm like, oh my god, this is getting worse and worse.
And a couple months ago, Marital Radar picked up an anomalous signal coming from his house.
It didn't help that James was directing that episode. You know, it's like the guy who wrote this is sitting right there. So that was a tough day. I think one of the best days, though, was episode 2. There's a scene where we all have a party up on the roof of Harcourt's apartment building where we all get really drunk. And that was actually the first day of us shooting for the new season. James was still working on Superman, so Greg Mottola, who did movies like Superbad and Adventureland, was our director on that. But I think James kind of planned it so that our first day of shooting, we could all be together for the first time, like since we did the first season. So it had been like 3 years since we were all in the same room together. And that was a really special day because, you know, we're starting a 6-month shoot where a lot of the episodes were not together. Like I'm with Tim Meadows and Sol Rodriguez for a lot of them. People are really separated. So that meant a lot for us to be able to come together on day 1 and spend a couple days shooting together. That's probably the best time I had. It was much easier the second season. We shot season 2 in Atlanta, and half the cast lives in Atlanta, so we could go to each other's house. I hung out a lot with Freddie Stroma, who plays Vigilante, James and Jen, who's Harcourt. They have a house in Atlanta. Danielle Brooks has a house. Like a lot of people lived in Atlanta. I was one of the only cast members who lives in Los Angeles. So, and we also had the luxury of it not being COVID. When we shot season 1, it was in Vancouver, and this was pre-vaccination. Like it was, you know, it was rough. There was not a lot of hanging out because of COVID. They encouraged us not to hang out, you know, to stay separate, and, you know, when you're not working, go to your apartment or hotel. So season 2 was a lot easier mentally and emotionally on people, I think. Favorite props. John Economos doesn't have a lot of props. They give him a lot of food. You know, the first time you see me, I'm in the surveillance van with chicken McNuggets, which were delicious. So that's a pretty good prop. You know, most of the stuff for me, you know, towards these last 3 episodes, you know, Robert Patrick stabs my character in the hand and then ties me to a chair. So that last episode that we saw, episode 7, that whole time I'm literally just sitting for a whole episode. I really have no props other than a bandage over my wound and a bunch of like duct tape, you know, wrist restraints. Yeah, I'm jealous of some of the other people's weapons and stuff and their superhero costumes. They get the cooler props than I do. I like John Cena's motorcycle. The Peace Cycle is, I think, my favorite prop of all. Yeah, I'm kind of guilty of a lot of trying to make people laugh when I'm not on camera. Danielle Brooks, who plays Adebayo, will sometimes get really frustrated because they'll be covering her and I'm off camera making faces at her trying to make her laugh. I try not to do it in dramatic scenes, but there's been a few times. John Cena is also pretty guilty of trying to make people laugh during scenes. But yeah, it's but usually everyone's pretty well behaved and prepared. You know, every season we have a couple guest directors, so it's a lot easier to do when we have a guest director. Usually James will kind of rein you in immediately and say, all right, knock it off. Let her say her lines. Thank you, Collider, for having me.